Narange Sesabastana Heri Boami Panai Bhakata Sange Mridanga Bhadya Sunite Mana Abasara Sadajache Gaura Bihita Kirtana Suni Anande Bhadaya Anande Hridaya Nache Jugala Murti Dekhiya Mara Parama Ananda Hoya Prasada Seva Gorite Hoya Sakala Prapancha Jaya Jedina Grihe Bhajana Dekhi Grihete Goloka Bhaya Charana Sedu Dekhiya Ganga Sukasa Simana Paya Tulasi Dekhi Juraya Prana Madhavato Shani Jani Gora Priya Saka Sevane Jivana Sartakamani Bhakati Vina Krishna Bhajane Anukula Payaja Pratideva se Parama Sukhe Svikara Karo Yeta Suddha Bhakata Charana Renu Bhajana Anukula Bhakata Seva Parama Siddhi Premalati Karomula Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Dust from the lotus feet of pure devotees is conducive to devotional service, while service to the Vaishnavas is itself the supreme perfection and the root of the tender creeper of divine love. I observe with great care the holidays like Ekadashi and Janmashtami, for they are the mother of devotion. As my dwelling place, I choose with the greatest of reverence and love the transcendental abode of Sri Krishna. All those places where my Lord Gaurasundar traveled for pastimes, I will visit in the company of loving devotees. My mind always begs for the opportunity to hear the music of the mridanga. Upon hearing the kind of kirtan ordained by Lord Gaurachandra, my heart dances in ecstasy. By beholding the deity forms of the divine couple, Sri Sri Radha Krishna, I feel the greatest joy. By honoring the Lord's prasad, I conquer over all worldly illusions. Goloka Vrindavan appears in my home whenever I see the worship and service of Lord Hari going on there. Upon seeing the Ganges, which is a river of nectar emanating from the lotus feet of the Lord, my happiness knows no bounds. The sight of the holy Tulasi tree soothes my soul, for I know she gives pleasure to Lord Krishna. By honoring Sak, a dear favorite of Lord Chaitanya, I consider life worthwhile. Whatever Bhaktivinoda obtains that is conducive to the service of Sri Krishna, he accepts every day with the greatest of joy. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur ki jai. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jasodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Jasodanandana Vraja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamunatira Vanachari. Jamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vijupad Paramahamsa Parivraja Kacharya Ashtotara Sata Sri Srimati His Grace et Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vijupad Paramahamsa Parivraja Kacharya Ashtotara Sata Sri Srimati His Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se ko Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara, Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Ki Jai, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath, Shyama Kunda Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai, Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Srimati Tulasi Devi Ki Jai, Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Sri Sri Radha Madan Mohan Ki Jai, Sri Sri Gaunitai Ki Jai, Sri Sri Jagannath Subhadra Baladev Ki Jai, Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the Samadevatis, all glories to the Samadevatis, all glories to the Samadevatis, all glories to Sri Guru Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutade Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvesesha Sunyavadi Pastyata Vedatarine Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Nand Govindaya Namo Namaha. We are reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamritam. Water. This is the third volume. Only he could lead them. Prabhupada in San Francisco and India in 1967. This is from the chapter entitled Swami Invites the Hippies. Usually, during the kirtan, at least one dancer would carry on in a narcissistic, egoistic way, occasionally becoming lewd to the point where Prabhupada would ask the person to stop. One evening, before Srila Prabhupada had come down from his apartment, a girl in a miniskirt began reading and gyrating in the temple during kirtan. Gyrating means going around like this. When one of the devotees went upstairs and told Prabhupada, he replied, "That's all right. Let her use her energy for Krishna. I'm coming soon and I will see for myself. When Prabhupada arrived and started another kirtan, the girl, who was very skinny, again began to wriggle and gyrate. Prabhupada opened his eyes and saw her. He frowned and glanced at some of his disciples, indicating his displeasure. Taking the girl aside, one of the women escorted her out. A few minutes later, the girl returned, wearing slacks and dancing in a more reserved style. Prabhupada was sitting on his dais, lecturing to a full house, when a fat girl who had been sitting on the window seat suddenly stood up and began hollering at him. Hollering means shouting. Ah! She is telling, "Are you just going to sit there?" she yelled. "What are you going to do now? Come on. Who are you?" Her action was so sudden and her speech so violent that no one in the temple responded. Unangered, Prabhupada sat very quietly. He appeared hurt. Only the devotees sitting closest to him heard him say softly, as if to himself, "It is the darkest of darkness." Another night, while Prabhupada was lecturing, a boy came up and sat on the dais beside him. The boy faced out towards the audience and interrupted Prabhupada. "I would like to say something now." Prabhupada politely said, "Wait until after the class, then we have questions." The boy waited for a few minutes, still sitting on the dais, and Prabhupada continued to lecture. But again, the boy interrupted. "I got something to say. I want to say what I have to say now." The devotees in the audience looked up, astonished, thinking that Swamiji would handle the matter and not wanting to cause a disturbance. None of them did anything. They simply sat while the boy began talking incoherently. Then Prabhupada picked up his kartals. "All right, let us have kirtan." The boy sat in the same place toward the kirtan, looking crazily, sometimes menacingly, at Prabhupada. After half an hour, the kirtan stopped. Prabhupada cut an apple into small pieces, as was his custom. He then placed a paring knife and a piece of apple in his right hand and held his hand out to the boy. The boy looked at Prabhupada, then down at the apple and knife. The room became silent. Prabhupada sat motionless, smiling slightly at the boy. After a long, tense moment, the boy reached out. A sigh rose from the audience as the boy chose the piece of apple from Prabhupada's open hand. Prabhupada had two things, the knife and the apple. And he is a crazy boy. Nobody knew what was going to happen. But Prabhupada knew. Haridas says, "I used to watch how Swamiji would handle things. It was not easy. To me, that was a real test of his powers and understanding. How to handle these people, not to alienate or antagonize or stir them up to create more trouble. He would turn their energy so that before they knew it, they were calm, like when you pat a baby and it stops crying. Swamiji had a way of doing that with words, with the intonation of his voice, with his patience to let them carry on for a certain period of time. Let them work it out, act it out even. I guess he realized that the devotees just couldn't say, listen, when you come to the temple, you can't behave that way. It was a delicate situation there. Often someone would say, I am God. They would get an insight or hallucination from their drugs. They would try to steal the spotlight. They wanted to be heard. And you could feel an anger against the Swami from people like that. Sometimes they would speak inspired and poetic for a while, but they could not sustain it. And their speech would become gibberish. Gibberish means nonsense. And the Swami was not one to simply pacify people. He wasn't going to cuddle them. He would say, what do you mean? If you are God, then you have to be all-knowing. You have to have the attributes of God. Are you omniscient and omnipotent? He would then name all the characteristics that one would have to be an avatar, to be God. He would rationally prove the person wrong. He had superior knowledge, and he would rationally explain to them, if you are God, can you do this? Do you have this power? Sometimes people would take it as a challenge and would try to have a verbal battle with the Swami. The audience's attention would then swing to the disturbing individual, the person who was grabbing the spotlight. Sometimes it was very difficult. I used to sit there and wonder, how is he going to handle this guy? This one is really a problem. But Swamiji was hard to defeat. Even if he could not convince the person, he convinced the other people in the crowd so that the energy of the room would change and would tend to quiet the person. Swamiji would win the audience by showing them that this person did not know what he was talking about. And the person would feel the vibrations of the room change, that the audience was no longer listening or believing his spiel, and so the person would shut up. So Swamiji would remove the audience rather than the person. He would do it without crushing the person. He would do it by superior intelligence, but also with a lot of compassion. When I saw him do these things, then I realized that he was a great teacher and a great human being. He had a sensitivity not to injure a person physically or emotionally, so that when the person sat down and shut up, he would not be doing it in defeat or anger. He would not be hurt. He would just be outwitted by the Swami. End of quote. Even while translating in the privacy of his room, Srila Prabhupada was interrupted by disturbances. Once, police cars and ambulances' sirens screaming, lights flashing, converged beneath his window after the Hells Angels had started a fight in the digger store in the next building. On another occasion, about 1:30 a.m., while Prabhupada was dictating teachings of Lord Chaitanya, a girl repeatedly knocked and called at Prabhupada's door. At first, he ignored the interruption. Since his arrival in San Francisco, he had completed many pages for this important book. Lord Chaitanya's discussions with Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, Ramananda Rai, and others explored many Krishna-conscious topics mentioned only briefly in the Bhagavad Gita. In the West, almost no one knew about these teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and now Srila Prabhupada intended to compile these teachings in one volume, providing the most complete presentation of Bhakti Yoga ever introduced in English. Such a book would give great substance to the Krishna consciousness movement. But now, his solitary concentration was being interrupted by a knocking at his door and a woman's voice calling. Getting up from his desk, Prabhupada went to the front room, but did not open the door. "Who is there?" A young woman answered, "I want to speak to you." "Come back later in the morning," Prabhupada told her. He knew that in San Francisco, just as in New York, he would not always be able to write peacefully. Preaching in America meant having to tolerate just this: a crazy call in the middle of the night, tearing one away from ecstatic concentration on the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. The lost souls of Haight-Ashbury, with their illusions of knowledge, their cries for help, their arrogant challenges, pulled his attention away from his mission of translating and commenting on the scriptures. Now, alone in his apartment, speaking through the locked door, Prabhupada told this intruder that he had work to do and that she should go away. He promised he would see her later that day. He was ready to speak with the hippies all day, but the early morning hours were the special time for his literary work. Preaching face-to-face to the conditioned souls was important. He had come here to preach, but he had picked these early hours to speak intimately to the whole world, through his books, without disturbance. The girl, however, continued pounding and calling until Prabhupada finally opened the door. There, standing in the hallway, he saw a teenage hippie with a glassy stare and deranged appearance. He asked her what she wanted. She remained tensely silent. "Speak," he told her. She stepped into his room. He saw her helpless, a victim in the ocean of Maya, and he asked her repeatedly what she wanted. Finally, the girl stared at him with widened eyes and exclaimed, "Look, Mahabula." Prabhupada decided to awaken Mukunda, who lived down the hall. He stepped barefoot into the hallway. The girl followed, shutting the self-locking door behind her. Now he was locked out of his apartment. She continued to stare at him defiantly in the bare, unfriendly surroundings of a corridor of locked doors at 1 in the morning. This was why the Babajis of Vrindavan stayed in their little cottages chanting the holy name, to avoid being bothered by ungodly people. The Babajis, of course, never even dreamed of these bizarre intrusions from the psychedelic San Francisco night. At Mukunda's door, Prabhupada began pounding and calling loudly, "Mukunda, Mukunda!" Mukunda awoke and opened the door. Astonished to see his spiritual master standing barefoot in the hallway, a wide-eyed young girl standing a few feet behind. Yet Prabhupada remained grave and aloof. "This girl came to my door," he began. He explained briefly what had happened and what should now be done. He did not appear angry or harassed by the girl, and he indicated that Mukunda should deal kindly with her. Mukunda remembered when Prabhupada had been driven out of his New York Bowery loft by his roommate David Allen, who had gone mad on LSD. Then also, Prabhupada had remained cool-headed though caught by a dangerous and awkward circumstance. Mukunda went downstairs and awoke Hayagriva, who had a key to Prabhupada's apartment. Srila Prabhupada then returned to his room and to his dictation of teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Mukunda saw the girl down to the street and admonished her not to bother an elderly gentleman like the Swami at such an hour. Staring at Mukunda, she said, "You are not ready," and walked away. At 7 o'clock, when Prabhupada came down to the temple for the morning class, the girl was sitting in the audience in a calmer state of mind. She apologized. Later in the day, Prabhupada repeated the story in good humor, recounting how he had several times asked the girl to speak. He opened his eyes wide, imitating her expression, and said, "Look, Mahaula," and laughed. "We shall go for a walk at 6:30, Srila Prabhupada said one morning. "You can drive me to the park." Several devotees accompanied him to Golden Gate Park's stored lake. They knew the park well and led Srila Prabhupada on a scenic walk around the lake, over a bridge, through forest-enclosed paths, and across a small rivulet, hoping to please him with nature's beauty. As he walked, striding quickly, he would point to a tree or stop to examine a flower. "What is this tree?" he would ask. "What is this flower?" Although his disciples were usually at a loss to answer. When Chaitanya Mahaprabhu passed through the forest of Vrindavan, he said, "All the plants, trees, and creepers were delighted to see him and rejoiced in his presence." The plant life there is like that in the spiritual sky, fully conscious. And these trees, Swamiji, how conscious are they? "Oh, the spirit soul is there," Prabhupada said, "but the consciousness has been arrested temporarily. Perception is more limited." Whatever Prabhupada saw, he saw through the eyes of Scripture, and his comments on the most ordinary things were full of transcendental instructions. As he walked, he reflected aloud, "Those who want to see God must first have the qualifications to see God. They must be purified, just like the cloud is now covering the sun. They say, 'Oh, the sun is not out.' But the sun is there, only our eyes are covered." Like tour guides, the boys led Prabhupada to the more picturesque areas. They came upon swans gliding on the lake. Srimad Bhagavatam, Prabhupada said, compares devotees to swans and literature about Lord Krishna to beautiful, clear lakes. The non-devotees, he said, were like crows attracted by the rubbish of mundane topics. Walking over a gravel path, he stopped and drew their attention. "Look at the pebbles. As many pebbles there are that many universes. And in each universe, there are innumerable living entities." The devotees delighted in bringing Swamiji to a rhododendron glen, its big bushes completely covered with white and pink flowers. And they felt privileged to see Krishna through Swamiji's eyes. The next morning, when Prabhupada again wanted to go to the park, more devotees accompanied him. They had heard from the others how Swamiji had displayed a different mood while walking. Again, the boys were ready to lead him along new trails around the lake. But without announcing a change in plans, he walked up and down the macadam road beside the lake. Prabhupada and his followers came upon a flock of sleeping ducks. Awakened by the sound of people walking on the path, the ducks began quacking, moving their wings, and walking away. When a few devotees hurried ahead to shoo the ducks from Prabhupada's path, the ducks began making sounds of grouching and grumbling. "Move, you ducks," one devotee said. "You are disturbing Swamiji." Prabhupada said quietly, "As we are thinking they are disturbing us, they are thinking we are disturbing them." Prabhupada stopped beneath a large tree and pointed to some bird droppings on the ground. "What does this mean?" he asked, turning to a new boy who stood beside him. Prabhupada's face was serious. The boy blushed. "I don't know what it means." Prabhupada remained thoughtful, waiting for an explanation. The devotees gathered around him. Looking intently down at the bird droppings, the boy thought that the Swamiji might be expecting him to decipher some hidden meaning in the pattern of the droppings. The way people read the future in tea leaves. He felt he should say something. It's the excreta, the defecations of birds. Prabhupada smiled and turned toward the others for an answer. They were silent. "It means," said Prabhupada, "that these birds," he pronounced the word birds, "have lived in the same tree for more than 2 weeks." He laughed. "Even the birds are attached to their apartments." As they passed the shuffleboard courts and the old man playing checkers, Prabhupada stopped and turned to the boys. "Just see," he said, "old people in this country do not know what to do, so they play like children, wasting their last days, which should be meant for developing Krishna consciousness. Their children are grown and gone away, so this is a natural time for spiritual cultivation. But no, they get some cat or dog, and instead of serving God, they serve dog. It is most unfortunate, but they will not listen. Their ways are set. Therefore, we are speaking to the youth who are searching." When Prabhupada and the boys passed a sloping green lawn just off Kesar Drive, the boys pointed out that this was the famous Hippie Hill. In the early morning, the gently sloping hill and the big quiet meadow surrounded by eucalyptuses and oaks were silent and still. But in a few hours, hundreds of hippies would gather here to lounge on the grass, meet friends, and get high. Prabhupada advised the boys to come here and hold kirtans. So we can stop here this reading today. Any questions or comments? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.